Habt ihr sie alle drin?
Ja, kommen noch mehr dazu.
Haben die selbst ihre Kameras ausgemacht oder sind wir das?
Die Kameras sollen alle ausgeschalten werden für
Okay.
alle Teilnehmer, weil sonst erscheinen sie mit auf dem Livestream. Die einzigen, die die Kameras anhaben werden, sind Sie, Herr Kramp.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, da muss ich das auch sagen, ne?
Genau, dann müssen Sie es auch noch mal kurz sagen. Das wurde genau von Universum vorhin schon mal gesagt. Da waren Sie aber noch nicht im Call.
Nee, genau. Haben Sie alle drin?
Es kommen immer noch mehr dazu, aber Sie können vielleicht hier.
Wie viel haben wir denn?
Wir sind jetzt schon bei.
Wir haben 45 Anmeldungen. Aber wir machen das ja auch live, Michael.
Ja.
Deswegen ist Universum auch dabei.
Universal Pictures.
Ja.
Universal Studio. MGM. Warner Brothers.
Ja.
So, jetzt sind alle drin.
Okay, then let's start. First of all, welcome to our video talk with Michael Link. I'm Klaus Gramko. I'm the head of the regional office of the Naumann Foundation. For those who don't know me, we would much more prefer to do this in the Willard, but unfortunately, our situation is that we have to do it through Zoom. There is a reason why we turned off all your cameras, because this is being shown live on Naumann Foundation, and you would then all show up at this live stream in Germany, and we wanted to stay away from that. I'm very happy, even if it's just through the internet, to welcome Michael. Before I start, if you have a question, please send the question into the Zoom. I will then forward it to Michael. Lots of you, or most of you, know Michael. Michael Link is a member of the Bundestag, and let me adjust my mic. Okay, here we go. And he is a spokesperson for European affairs for the Free Democratic Party Parliamentary Group. I think it's very appropriate to have him here and talk about the subject on the European presidency of Germany. Michael and I have been very long friends. Our political cooperation started at the Democratic Convention in 1992. And we were actually planning to spend the Democratic Convention of 2020 again together. But of course, Corona made this impossible. Michael has been in politics from very early on. He was the treasurer of the Young Liberals of Germany. Then he worked in parliament as a staff member. Very interesting assignment. He was at the committee that was actually looking at the history of the GDR for the Bundestag. He also worked for Klaus Kinkel in his Bundestag office. His lifelong dream was to become a member of parliament in the Bundestag, which he accomplished in, 2012?
05.
05, that's right, 05, oh, sorry, 05. And then, of course, in 2009, we entered the government, and in 2011, he became the deputy foreign minister, Staatsminister in the foreign ministry. And then, of course, 2013 happened. The FDP was no longer in the Bundestag, and he became the director of ODIHR. Actually lived in Warsaw for 4 years at the OSZE. There he was very instrumental in promoting elections and human rights, which he still has very close contact here in Washington to the Helsinki Commission. And then he wanted to run again. He ran again in 2017 and then came back when the FDP came back. And before I start and give you the floor to talk about your perspective, what Germany should do in the next 6 months, or how important this presidency is, also want to congratulate you that I saw that your party convention nominated you as a direct candidate again from Heilbronn for the Bundestag. For those who don't know German politics well, this is the time for all the parliamentarians and one of the party. I know I've read a couple of things. You have very precise ideas of what should be done and what can be done. And I want to give you the floor. I want to thank you for taking the time. Please.
Thank you very much, Klaus. And I'm very glad I saw a little bit who's on the list of the participants list today. I'm very, very glad to see that so many people are interested in for the Washington participants, it's a lunch conversation. For the German participants, it's an evening conversation. Thanks a lot for that. My intention was, together with Klaus, that we address a little bit the transatlantic relevance and transatlantic importance of EU in this time, and what Germany can do for strengthening the transatlantic ties in these days. It's absolutely crucial that we do it. And as Germany and Europe are very much inward looking right now in this pandemic, and others too, of course, we know that everybody is very busy with him or herself. I think we, as Free Democrats in Germany, who have a very internationalist reputation, we really should reach out now, especially to strengthen the transatlantic ties. Especially in a time where we are confronted in Europe with a Russia which is more and more assertive and aggressive, and with a China which is in many, many ways interfering in Europe in unforeseen terms. If you look at what happened in Serbia in the last weeks and days, how they tried to interfere, if you look at what happened in Italy, what the Chinese did and tried there in terms of so-called support for Italy, that is really, really a new category of interference from outside powers. And therefore, we Europeans need very, very much to reach out to the US, cross-party line, Democrats and Republicans alike. And that is what Naumann Foundation is standing for, and that's what the Free Democrats also are standing for. So thanks a lot for having me. And I'll briefly outline 2 or 3 aspects of the German presidency of the EU, which is now lasting until December. And then, of course, feel free to ask questions about whatever you want. I can go into details of the nitty-gritty of the EU budget if you want, but I can promise you, you won't like it, because this is a real tough issue. And you know perfectly how tough budget and appropriations is in the US. Of course, it's the same in the EU. We have a lot of things to do now with our budget, and it falls exactly in the 6 months of German presidency. So Angela Merkel, she has to find a deal. She has to cut a deal in finding the next budget for the EU. And maybe that's interesting for you for the next 7 years. The EU always makes a 7-year budget, good and bad, because good, once you have a 7 years deal, more or less you have allocations and agreements for 7 years. Bad, once every 7 years you have a real fight. But the good thing is, we Europeans agreed on one thing. We don't fight anymore on the field, on the battlefield. We fight at the green table, and we agreed to get along with our disagreements in a peaceful way. That is what the EU is about. And despite all impressions which you might have sometimes of the European Union, it's not going to fall apart. It's here to stay. And it's especially after Brexit, that is even leading now to a closer cooperation of the remaining 27 members. So don't think that the EU is something which is in a way only inward looking. We try to use, and that's also the free democratic approach, we try to use it to strengthen actually our decision making, coming, for example, to qualified majority voting in foreign and security policy. Today, it's still, we need unanimous votes in the Foreign Policy Council. In the future, we want to have majority voting, and that would make Europe much, much stronger in foreign policy. That will be one of the points, certainly Germany should work. We as opposition in Germany press the German government very much to reform the decision-making in the EU. But the main topics on the table are, beside the budget, certainly how do we deal with China? How do we deal with Russia? How do we deal with overcoming the consequences of the pandemic? On our side of the ocean, it's certainly maybe not so much in Germany. We have been quite lucky in many ways, but in other countries like Spain, like Italy, like France, in smaller ones as well, the consequences, the economic consequences of the pandemic are really extreme. So we are preparing to set up a 700 billion record support program in the European Union. And now we are having a lot of discussions how to best address and distribute the money. What would be the conditions to enjoy the support? Would it be grants? Would it be loans? How will be the distribution key? You can imagine that that is between the 27 member states. That is a huge issue. So that will be on the table of Mrs. Merkel. And just to briefly explain you what the presidency, the German presidency is, it's a rotating presidency. The last one was Croatia, the first half of 2020. The second half of this year is the German presidency, and then every semester another country takes over the rotating presidency. But all this under, of course, the permanent guidance of the Commission and under the permanent guidance of the President of the European Council, who is some sort of, well, head of state is not the right word, but the primus inter pares, that is Charles Michel, the Belgian former Prime Minister. So governance in the EU might still seem a little bit complicated for you and complex, but it can only be understood from history. And when Germany wants to be, let me put it like this, Wolfgang Ischinger called it, if Germany wants to be an enabling power, a power which is enabling Europe to be stronger, to speak with one voice, to be united, and to be ready for the challenges of the 21st century, then indeed I think Germany would be the right country to be such an enabling power, but only if we can put ourselves in the shoes of the others. And here's my critical point, and the end of my introductory statement, my critical point to our government. What they sometimes do not enough, and Merkel in her fourth term is way not as careful as in her first term. What they do not do enough, the German government, they don't bother enough about the interests of smaller and medium-sized countries in the European Union. Having a deal and having an agreement with France is good, but it's not enough. You need to reach out to the Scandinavians, to the Nordics, to the Baltics, to the Visegrad 4. It's when Germany wants to be the enabling power in the EU, able to make a compromise and to lead Europe in a way which is not dominating. Leadership without domination, that's the key. Leadership without domination, then you need to reach out to the small and medium-sized members. Otherwise, the smaller ones, like the Czechs, like the Hungarians, like others, they will feel alienated, or they will be not taken along in this European project. That is the key, and that is where we liberals would do it another way. That was when we had liberal foreign ministers, always a key priority to have basically every week at least 3, 4, 5 visits in smaller or medium-sized member countries, member states of the European Union. And that is the key for having a successful chairmanship and presidency of the EU. So the clock is ticking. We only have 6 months in Germany. In addition to that, we have the pandemic. In addition to that, we have a summer break in August. And in addition to that, what is not done by mid-December will never be done, because the Christmas break also in Brussels begins by mid-December. So it's a tough semester what we are facing. The next presidency will, which is following then, are Portugal and Slovenia. So we are working very closely with them also. But having said that, the key burden will be on Germany to do the real trick. Other topics on the agenda, finding a new distribution system for asylum seekers, finding a new distribution system for refugees, and finding, of course, a way to protect our external borders together. Huge issue, huge topic here on our side of the transatlantic pond. So far from my side here, of course, we are very closely following what's happening in the US. We are following with a lot of sympathy, because we know how important are these transatlantic relations. They are key for our interests. We follow, of course, with a lot of concern. We suffer and feel with you in the pandemic, because we see of course, the fighting of the people and of the many states. We see a lot of things happening with concern when it comes to things in and around the White House. And among friends, let me say very clearly that we really hope that the United States will come out of this situation stronger than before. And we really count very much on very close transatlantic relations in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael, for the introductory word. And it already raised a couple of questions on my side. You talked about the importance of the budget negotiation. I think since we all are focusing on the current crisis and the Corona crisis, on how we can get out of it or what's going to happen afterwards, what can Europe do better than, let's say, the nation states? Or where can Europe put their money in order to help the other countries and strengthen Brussels? Because there was a weakening of Brussels in the view of the people. What is the EU doing? Which of course was unfair during the crisis itself. They couldn't do much. But now all of them, I mean, I think the agreement is now Europe can do. Where should the focus should be, and what should be done with the help of Europe?
The key what we do in terms of we call it in the EU the so-called recovery package. That is this the 750 billion package, 750 billion euro, which is enormous, of course, for the EU. Never before we had such a support program. The lion's share of it will go to member states in terms of recovering their economy. Trying to help them to invest in their health system, trying to help them to finance, for example, short labor schemes. Yeah, you have this system where on a temporary base you can reduce the working time of your workers, and they get the difference between what they work less and actually what they earn usually will be paid by the state. That is what we call in Germany the Kurzarbeit system, which is a very successful thing. It helped a lot in Germany, and so we try to a little bit, with the help of the EU, to export that successful model to others who want to adopt it, and it's a very, very, very popular thing. In addition to that, let me say very clearly, the added value of the EU budget is mostly underestimated in foreign policy and defense policy. Here is the huge area, the largest area, and that is totally independent of the pandemic of COVID-19. We really need to get our act together when it comes to procurement and capacity building in defense and foreign policy spending. Here are the real areas where we need the added value of the EU. It makes simply no sense to have non-coordinated spending in defense area, in procurement area, where we could much better pool our firepower when it comes to future combat systems, radar, Air Force, Navy. There is a lot of progress already. Germany and the Netherlands have a lot of procurement together. Germany and France agreed to develop the next fighter plane and the main combat ground combat system as well. So all these things are important, and to really see where we have added value when Europe acts together, in the protection of borders, in foreign policy, and in defense.
Another big issue, beside the budget and of course Corona, and this complicated it even more, is Brexit, which was and has been for a long time in the forefront of the debate on Europe. Where are we there? I mean, we don't hear anything. What's going on? I mean, the only thing I know is like by the end of the year, there is a deadline, and if there is no agreement, there's going to be a hard Brexit. So where are we at this point?
Unfortunately, the fact that we don't hear anything is not good news, because the negotiations are more or less stuck. Ever since we had the divorce deal with the UK, we are struggling for having a cooperation agreement for how do we finance our cooperation after the divorce. So we are only halfway done. If we don't find an agreement with the UK on how do we organize the access of the United Kingdom to the internal market, or let's say in areas of goods, of free capital movement, of free movement of persons, etc., then of course certainly we will have a no Brexit, which will be extremely harmful for both sides. Unfortunately, Boris Johnson is extremely stubborn when it comes to negotiating. He says that he wants to have the deal by the end of this year. A free trade agreement, a comprehensive one, or even a very, very, very far-reaching one, which needs to be ratified and put into national law by 27 states. This is sheer impossible to negotiate in 1 year's time, especially under the conditions of the pandemic. We proposed him, Europe proposed him to have a prolongation for 1 year or two. He rejected it outrightly so. And I think he, in the end, risks to have a no deal because he thinks very much that with another administration of President Trump, he can cut an extremely favorable deal for the United Kingdom. But I think that is very short-sighted. In the end, the US will have also tough negotiations with the UK. And when it comes to trade negotiations, there are no gifts. There are no so-called friends. In the end, you need to really find a level playing field with mutual market access and with fair rules. It would all be easier if we wouldn't have the Northern Ireland border. The Irish Republic and the Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland, of course, their land border are the largest and the most difficult remaining obstacle for finding a deal, because here the UK on the one side is not accepting that Northern Ireland remains in the customs area of the EU. On the other side, we cannot accept that Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, would in any way be divided again. So this is a really, really complicated situation where even the Good Friday Agreement, negotiated at the time by US Senator Mitchell and others, is at stake. So we hope very much that we find an agreement, but it's a terribly complicated issue where we offered the UK in the end to have a sort of an agreement like, let's say, CETA, that is the Canada agreement. But that is now not enough for Johnson. He wants more access to the EU. Okay, he can have that. He can have the Swiss model, he can have the Norwegian model, but that implies, of course, that he should respect then, of course, some rules. If you want to be on the EU market, you should respect EU rules.
You also mentioned a trademark of Free Democratic foreign ministers, that they were always trying, and this was basically started with Genscher, but also Kinkel and Westerwelle followed it traditionally in Europe, to take care or to talk much more to the smaller states. And I think people did not really ever understood why this is so important. What happened was that last week or 2 weeks ago, with the election of the Eurogroup chair, who is not the pick by the Germans and the French, a little bit of a revolution, or saying, hey, listen, we are important too, and we can do also important things when we unite against you. Should we read into this, the Germans, specifically the German government, a warning sign?
Well, I mean, it's not a recent development, Klaus. Yeah. We see since quite some years, and that's what I mentioned when I said Merkel in her first term. In her first term, she was really careful. She put herself in the shoes of the neighbors, etc., etc. Now in her fourth term, and I think our US interlocutors, they understand the problems of a fourth term. You're not as new, as fresh as in your first one. Maybe you lose also a little bit your attention for the really important things, because you are too self-conscious and think, if I agree with the French, it will work anyway. No, it's not that easy. The EU is a complex balance of interests, and if you don't take care of the interests of, as I said, Scandinavians, Nordics, Baltics, and of different countries in the East and Southeast, then you can end up being isolated. It's not a new development that Germany, for several times, had been isolated in the Council and did not get a majority for our proposals. The most of our legislation in the EU is being done by qualitative majority voting. Foreign policy is unanimous votes. That is complicated, but when it comes, for example, to discussions like single market, rules for the single market, take the CO2 emission schemes or so, there a lot of decisions have been made very damaging to the German car manufacturing sector. The CO2 emissions which have been decided at the Brussels level are really hitting the German car manufacturing sector. And why? Because there was a huge coalition against the Germans. That is the result of a lot of developments where the Germans maybe did not listen enough to what happened in their neighborhood. Take Nord Stream, for example. Nord Stream, something which is Nord Stream, I know it's very unpopular in the US, but it's also unpopular in the EU. Talk to the Danes, talk to the Swedes, talk to the Poles, talk to the Baltic states. Some of them remain silent, but behind the scenes, they all don't like it. And Germany nevertheless pushed this project very much. That had a consequence, that had a price. Or take the refugee crisis which we had in 2015 and 16. It was certainly very important and good that Germany helped refugees and showed a humanitarian face. But this needs to be done in a way which is not shocking or overwhelming your neighbors. This needs to be negotiated. And it was not negotiated. It was one-sided. So all these things, or how Germany quitted nuclear, for example. Germany is quitting now nuclear energy and at the same time also carbon. This is very frustrating for a lot of our neighbors who have a different energy policy. No, Europe can only work if we listen and take care of each other. And therefore, I would say it's high time that the German government takes into account much more the interests of our immediate EU neighbors. Only then can we expect also from them to have more respect for our interests, like in car manufacturing and exports.
Let me go to one of the member states who had an important election yesterday, Poland.
Oh, yeah.
You've lived in Warsaw for 4 years while you worked for ODIHR. What two things? First of all, what do these elections mean for Europe? And in what way can Europe or should Europe do anything when the Poles basically trying to do what Orban is doing in Hungary, or even stronger? What realistically can the EU do, and and also what does it mean? I know that the current president and new president or president-elect also attacked German journalists or Germany in the campaign. What does it do to German-Polish relations?
First of all, when a campaigning president or an incumbent president is campaigning on let's say using stereotypes on other countries, on other nations, in this case us Germans, we should simply not react to that. We should not enter this game in this tit for tat. That is very dangerous. He was apparently campaigning. It's a pity that he did it. It's a very regrettable and negative thing, but we should not enter in a tit for tat. And we should also not try to tell the Poles how democracy is working. They know very, very good how democracy is working. We need respect also for other societies who sometimes are maybe more conservative or more progressive, whatever. What is the key, certainly, with all due respect, we need to stay all together on the legal basis, on the constitutional basis, on the human rights basis we have all agreed to in the European Union. The Fundamental Charter of Human Rights and the European Convention on Human Rights. That is something everybody was signing into, and we should respect that. Here we are on safe ground to remind our fellow Europeans where maybe they might to have a second look, maybe in Hungary in the legislation on media, or in Poland on the issue of the independence of the courts. But let's do that not as Germans. Let's do that not as French or Italians. We have institutions. We have the European Parliament. We have the European Court of Justice. We have the European Commission. These institutions, they are entitled to do so. But we as Germans should be very careful to lecture any neighbor and to teach them in democracy.
I'm going to go a little bit away from the EU before I got to the transatlantic relation. What's your feel in the situation in Germany right now about the Corona crisis, since we all deal with it? And I've seen Michael Meyer from Bremen, whom you know, in here.
Oh, yes.
He told me last week that he tested positive. He's now a judge. So, I mean, this thing is around and obviously will stay around. What's the feel in the political field about the Corona crisis, and also how to handle it?
Well, none of us, nobody has ever lived such a situation, and it's extremely serious. We see mutations of the virus. We see even unpredictable developments. And if we hope for a swift and fast solution from science, probably it will not come. The vaccine will really take a lot of time. So what we need to do is we have to learn and to try to get along with this danger without completely stopping public life. But to do both at the same time is very, very difficult. In Germany, social distancing, the masks, this is certainly something which is widely accepted, but of course not accepted in all places. As in the US, there are a lot of discussions, but maybe contrary to that, and a little bit, of course, also to maybe a little bit of German classical approach, there's a very careful, let's say, opinion to say, okay, better a little bit slower than too fast, because we see also in some neighbors, let's say Serbia, or let's say what we see right now in Spain, with a opening up, which is maybe a little bit too soon, that we better do it slower, because having a second wave is certainly something which we definitely want to avoid. But we need to learn to live with the virus. It's not going to be going away very, very soon. And therefore, we have to find smart and intelligent ways to opening up, and at the same time also having the necessary safety and security in place. That is a challenge for the whole of the society. But having a lockdown, a continued lockdown in schools, economy, universities, cultural life, etc., is certainly also not an option. So it's a challenge for the whole of the society.
Bundestag stayed in session the whole time, right? I mean,
yes, we did. We did the whole time, and actually, it was. We never imagined that it's so easy to have votes, also in a different way. If there is a good thing, if there is one good thing in the pandemic, that is that we reconsider the way how we work, and sometimes we make it just easier. Every voting was in person in the chamber, and right now we simply do it for 2-3 hours. Still in person, but not in the chamber, but in the lobby, and of course with social distancing, and it works. So we have shown that the parliament is able to work, and it's, as you know, a very large parliament, but it's able to work, including social distancing. And we are lucky to say that we had no further infection in the parliament since April, and that is. I think a very, very good sign that the social distancing and the masks are really working. And by the way, Michael Meyer von Bremen, he has my very, very best greetings. I remember our good conversations. I would be glad to see him again one day, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I hope so too. And it also shows how viral this thing is still going. A huge question, and this is something that we're probably going to debate a little later, but sometimes, what do you see? I mean, what this crisis has shown is that how interconnected the world is, on the one hand.
Yeah.
You know, call it globalization or not, but it's very interconnected. On the other hand, also in this crisis, how all of a sudden everybody went back to be the nation state. I mean, this is in the beginning because nobody knows how to deal with this. I mean, how can we prevent this from happening? Because we are people, or as liberals, we are very much into interconnecting the interconnected world. How can we, prevent this from happening again? I mean, it's of course it's difficult if you have very strong countries that are really not interested into this interconnected government, and this is of course also it's slight move from my questioning towards the transatlantic relations. But what's your idea about what can be done?
Well, on our side in the European Union, it means clearly that we have, and we didn't have it yet. We need really joint standards for having health categories, and we need clearly more cooperation and even competences on the EU level, on the EU competence level for dealing with such crisis. That we had a complete lockdown on the German-French border, for example, one which is economically extremely important. It's the most important one we have in the European Union, with an exchange of goods, persons, etc., where you have millions commuting from the one side to the other, or take down the border between Netherlands and Germany, or Belgium and Germany. All this is, of course, is extremely crucial, and we should avoid. We need to find ways how we can deal with such a situation without closing the border. The real danger in Germany was not at the German-French border. The danger in Germany was in areas where we had enormous outbreaks of the virus, new infections, and the same in France. So we need maybe instead of national lockdowns or state lockdowns, we need to find a way to have more regionalized local lockdowns, but strictly enforced and doing this rather than having a complete closure of the border. By the way, the development now between the European Union and the US with ongoing restrictions on the travel between the two of them, I see that with a lot of concern. Take all the, not only the family ties, take the lots of students, and let alone, of course, also the economic ties. That is a real mess. And we need to find a way for experts, students, families to find a way to visit each other and to begin with this exchange rather than completely locking down the travel between us. That would be extremely dangerous, because we should not, while fighting the pandemic, we should also, of course, try to make possible the necessary exchange, human and economic, we need, and academic.
In regards to travel, I can't travel to Germany.
I know, and that's very bad. Yeah.
I mean, you know, even not even, you know, we would love to go. I would love to go at least for 2 weeks, but there is for me 2 weeks quarantine in Germany, so it doesn't make sense for me to go. So it's
Well, therefore, the place you come from needs to be better in the focus.
Yeah, no, I mean, U.S. is still on the list of the EU of countries, you know, that they really don't let him in.
Yeah, but when you come from Maine, say where you have an extremely low infection rate, when you come from Maine, it should be something different than, let's say.
I mean, where we live, it's stable. I mean, it's not over, but it's a stable number. But of course, then what you hear in Europe is Florida, Texas,
Miami-Dade,
North Carolina, which of course the numbers are horrible. But you will face something similar with these people who are coming in back from Mallorca. When you saw the pictures over the weekend, where, you know, nobody did social distancing or nobody face mask, and they partied like they always did. So I mean, I think I think this is something that the political field should even stronger educate people on this part, because I think I have two very specific questions, and I don't know if you can answer them. Maybe the other one I really don't know. This is very, very specific. Will Europe make a full implementation of the GDPR a priority?
Mm-hmm.
And will Europe establish a new regulatory framework for artificial intelligence? I hope Mark is happy that I asked those questions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first question was on the GDPR.
Yeah. A priority of a full implementation.
You mean? I think this is probably, of course, he means the recovery plan.
What is GDPR anyway? I'm sorry.
GDP is clear, but GDPR I'm not aware of. GDP, the gross domestic product, but GDPR maybe he means something else.
Yeah, something with the internet. Maybe the data.
Okay. General data protection. Okay. Well, this is
the stuff where you had general data protection regulation.
Well, the experts in the European Parliament, they really insist very much. They are desperate to have it. On the other side, without being an expert in that area, I'm more into foreign policy and to budget and appropriations. On the other side, the interests in the Council of Ministers are not so homogeneous as in the European Parliament. So I see here's no very homogeneous negotiation position. And by the way, a little bit clearer on the artificial intelligence side, where you really see a new development in the EU, and maybe that is interesting for you to see and to hear. where you really see a new awareness is, and that was not the case until 2 years ago, that we need to be able to find the capacities and capabilities, for example, for setting up a 5G network with our own resources, independent of Chinese resources like Huawei, etc. I think one of the key areas where, be it in artificial intelligence or be it in 5G, where we really should have closer cooperation between the US and the European Union, is on all these security-related areas of newest technologies, artificial intelligence, 5G. I think that would be a good landing zone where transatlantic security interests should really focus on. NATO is good. We really need to invest in NATO. And my party, as you know, we are always very much in favor of an increased also defense spending. But the key area where we need more is developing 5G networks independent of Chinese or Russian resources, which are secure, which are safe, and which are ready to use, and we don't have it yet.
Let me get, you mentioned 5Gs, which of course gets us to China. How do you look at the reaction of the German government? I mean, we are in opposition, so we can be a little bit more about what's happening in Hong Kong.
Well, I mean, Mrs. Merkel, the Chancellor, she had to cancel the EU-China summit. Well, officially because of the pandemic, but I think it was high time to cancel this summit. You cannot simply have a summit and do business as usual when China is apparently violating its obligations under the Hong Kong Act, under, by the way, also under when it comes to security threats and challenges to Taiwan. This is maybe even the bigger and the larger concern. As important as it is that we highlight Hong Kong, we should very, very clearly keep in mind that in the background looming is the whole issue of the South China Sea, the Paracel Islands, Presley Islands, and especially Taiwan, where we really need to defend democracy in Taiwan, which is extremely vibrant and successful democracy that should have our support and our sympathy. Very clearly, the German government was way too silent on Hong Kong for a long time. Now, meanwhile, they got it under the pressure also of a lot of other European states. They finally also began to become more critical. And yesterday, even our president, our federal president, Mr. Steinmeier, who is not well known for speaking out on human rights very loudly, he clearly criticized China for violating human rights on the under international obligations. So I think the pressure from the opposition did work. The pressure from other EU countries did work. And let's not forget Germany is holding a seat in the Security Council right now in the UN. This month, even chairing the Security Council in July. So it was high time that finally Germany was speaking out. By the way, this summit between this EU-China summit, it was very much Merkel's idea. It was not an official EU summit. It was planned bilaterally by her in the beginning. So that is a little bit also this sort of bilateral approach, which we see more critical. The EU should always speak with one voice when it comes to Russia and to China, and it should speak through our common European institutions. There is a guy, Mr. Borrell. He is the so-called high representative, a foreign minister, not to be called a foreign minister. We should give him more power. We should give the EU diplomacy more power, really to speak for Europe. That's what is needed. We need less nation state and more EU power.
You mentioned Russia. From your view, how is Russia doing? I mean, what's the economic situation?
Well, we had maybe that is something very interesting. You mentioned that I'm still active in the OSCE Parliament Assembly. We had a call the other week with a lot of colleagues from the House and from the Senate. Richard Hudson was there, the congressman from North Carolina. Senator Cardin was there from the Democratic side. He's also very active. We are working very closely together, and we have long-standing ties and friendship there between the colleagues. And we had a long exchange on the constitutional referendum in Russia. I mean, that is what is happening there. It is really worth noting. Here you have a country signatory to the European Convention of Human Rights, signatory to the OSCE Charter of Paris. They are simply doing a complete constitutional overhaul, and Mr. Putin can stay in power until 2036. I mean, that is unbelievable. He will be still there, in theory, of course, when all the others will be long gone, when even the successor of the incumbent president, let him be re-elected or not, will already be gone. The successor of Mrs. Merkel will be gone. So this is really not a healthy situation. And when we criticize Russia, dear friends, that is very important for us. We don't criticize the Russian people or the Russian culture or so, but I think they deserve better. Russia is a country which is governed increasingly by an authoritarian small group of mostly men, dominated by security circles and the secret services. I think this is a pity that this country is losing so much time. It could be much better off economically and so on. But the vector of development, how Russia is developing today, is a huge concern for us Europeans, as we are so closely living there with them. And the permanent threat which they are issuing to the Baltic states and to others is something we simply cannot accept. So the more aggressive behavior we see from Russia and the less responsible behavior we see, let's say in Syria, the more we should also think about, of course, having a very, very clear position. And that is why we need so much the transatlantic cooperation. I cannot understand that especially, of course, the US president still is not really accepting this danger, which we can see from the Russian side. We have very, very good communication with the Republican House members and senators. We work very closely on that issue. There is a huge confidence and a common understanding of the threat. Unfortunately, that does not stretch to the very top in the White House, and that is a weakening of NATO. When I speak about European defense, I mean a European pillar of NATO. I don't speak about separating Europe from the USA. Quite to the contrary, and that is why we really need to have a common threat analysis. If we don't do that together, the European Union and the US, a joint threat analysis, then of course we will play into the hands of all these authoritarian leaders around the world.
Okay, Michael, the last one, and this is from Mike, whom you also know, Mike Shields. As I mentioned, you just were re-nominated for next year's federal election. He wanted to have a quick view from your perspective. Where is the FDP nationally, and what will happen with the CDU in the next election? Will they stay the way they are, very high, or what's the breakdown right now? And maybe as a last sentence, what's your view on it's even longer than this presidential elections, but what's your view on next September?
So first of all, I'm indeed very happy. I had my primary last Friday. Everything went well, and of course, that's also in politics. Of course, you always have to be fully focused on the local things, but especially when you also do international politics and EU politics, it's very important to explain to voters why that matters also in the constituency. In my constituency, I can do that, and I do it all the time because we are very dependent on exportations and exports. If we don't have anybody in the world who buys our products, of course, we are pretty soon we will not not have any wealth anymore. So translating politics into normal days life, into everybody, so that people really understand what's happening. That is for me why I like to be in politics and what I like to do also in my constituency. And there I care more about what we are standing for. I don't care so much about CDU. They have a leadership contest. They have 3-4 people, 3 officially running, and
just quick question. When is this going to happen? When are they going to have a vote on this? In September?
No, a little bit later, second semester. I think October or so.
Mm-hmm.
It's still not clear because of the pandemic when they do their let's say convention to do it. Their party leadership meeting. But in politics, it's important what you are standing for. Don't define yourself on what your opponent is doing. A lot of people, the media, they love to discuss Mr. Laschet, Mr. Söder, Mr. Merz, Mr. Röttgen. They love to discuss that. I can tell you, independent of who is chairman or president or party leader of the Christian Democrats, or who is the candidate for the chancellor, independent of that, we as Free Democrats need to stand with a very clear focus. And that is, for those of you who are familiar with the German politics, and I know that most of you are, the Free Democrats are a combination of the one side, fiscal conservative approach and socially liberal approach on the other side. That is, to be frank, that is not a 20% or 25% option in Germany. Germans, in lots of them, of course, they like the nanny state, they like big government in many ways, and we have much higher taxes and involvement, of course, of the state than in most EU states, or let alone on the federal level. So the liberal message, this message of fiscal conservatism and classical liberal, of course, socially liberal, that is, I think, that has a potential in Germany for around 10 to 15%. And that's where I see FDP. We want to have a double-digit result next year. We are fighting for a double-digit result. We are polling now at around 6, sometimes 5, sometimes 7%. That's not enough. We want to be, if possible, at around 10. And then, of course, let's see what coalition is possible. A lot of people in the CDU, they are dreaming of having a coalition with the Greens. The Greens, they are so eager to govern, they are even publicly submitting congratulations to CDU whenever there is any anniversary of a prominent CDU guy. So that is, I think voters will see that. That's not really serious. But still, the Greens, they will have their share of maybe nearly 20%. The huge question will be, of course, the CDU be further going to the center or even to the left and going into that direction? That would be a pity for the country. I would be very, very interested to have another coalition where we, together with the CDU, can have a very clear liberal and reformist agenda. But therefore, we need to have a good result of around 10%, and we will be fighting for that in state elections next year in Baden-Württemberg and Rhineland-Palatinate, and of course on the national level. Unfortunately, a coalition with the Social Democrats, and they have some good people. It's not only left-leaning guys there. Take a look to the Minister of Finance. He's not a left-leaning guy. He's a very interesting guy, Mr. Scholz. But unfortunately, they're so weak that another option is not possible. The danger in Germany is that in the end, the Greens might be tempted to lead a government together with SPD and the Left Party, our post-communists. So that is a danger which needs desperately to be avoided, because that would fundamentally change political landscapes in Germany. And so we will therefore also clearly be fighting that possible picture, that scenario, which would be extremely dangerous for Germany. That would mean that Germany is again the unpredictable man in the center of Europe, and that must never happen.
On that happy note, Michael, appreciate you taking the time for an hour to talk with us. I want to thank everybody who joined us today. and I hope we added some value to your knowledge. And I completely agree with you. I'm missing our travel together, our meeting together, and also our events here in Washington or somewhere else at our conferences.
The Stammtisch.
Also, which I've completely forgot, which is the most important position he has. He's in the board of the Naumann Foundation. So we are very appreciative the way the board is dealing also with this situation, and really listening to us here outside Germany. So I appreciate this, and we get a very good response from the board, Michael, and I know you're playing there a big part. I want to thank all of you. I hope to see you soon, and we will be back in after the summer break. So I wish you a very well summer break, and see you later. And thank you again.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.